It all started with a sound. Not a scream, not a gunshot, not a siren, just a simple sound. The sharp, cold snap of a plastic ID card hitting the marble floor in the middle of Granite Capital Bank's grand lobby. It bounced once, then settled face down like it had just been slapped by the universe itself. James Carter didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He didn't show anger. He simply bent down, picked up his ID, brushed it off, and looked up. Staring down at him was Logan Daniels, the kind of man who wore his arrogance like a custom-tailored suit. Young, white Ivy League smirk, expensive cologne, and a belief that he could size up a man in under 5 seconds. Logan chuckled. "People like you don't open corporate accounts here," he said, adjusting his gold tie. "Try a credit union or Walmart." In that moment, everyone in the lobby froze. A woman holding her coffee dropped it. A young intern turned his head. Even the security guard stiffened. But James, he stood up straight. Military straight. Calm. Too calm. You see, Logan thought he was just dismissing another nobody. What he didn't know was that James Carter wasn't just any man. He was the father of Ava Carter, the CEO of Carter Tech, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in America. A company that was at that very moment finalizing a $5 billion infrastructure deal with Logan's very own bank. And what happened next? Well, that ID card didn't just bounce off the marble. It cracked something much bigger. A partnership, a reputation, a career. And ultimately, it exposed a kind of arrogance that no suit and tie could hide. This is the story of how 5 seconds of disrespect cost a bank $5 billion and ended one man's career forever. And it all began with a sound. James Carter didn't storm out. He didn't demand to see a manager. He didn't yell. He just smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile you give when something's funny. It was the kind of smile that said, "You just made a very, very expensive mistake." As he walked past the velvet ropes, past the polished floor, and the fake smiles of tellers pretending they hadn't just witnessed a public humiliation, James pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over one name, Ava Carter. He typed, "We need to talk. Granite Capital. Urgent." The reply came in less than a minute. "Everything okay, Dad? I'm in final contract review with them now." He hesitated, then replied, "Let's just say your future banking partner showed me exactly who they are." Cut to Logan Daniels now back at his desk on the 14th floor, sipping espresso from a cup that cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill. He was still grinning. To him, what had happened in the lobby was just another quality control moment. He leaned back in his chair and told his assistant, Rachel, "These people walk in thinking they own the place, can't even dress the part." Rachel said nothing, but her hands paused over the keyboard. And somewhere across the city, in a sleek office filled with glass walls and silent power, Ava Carter sat in a boardroom with her executive team. Final signatures were just hours away. The partnership with Granite Capital was to be the biggest move in Carter Tech's history, a $5 billion alignment of tech and finance, a long-term infrastructure contract that would put her company on the global map. Until she saw her father's message. Her eyes narrowed. Her tone changed. "Push the signing back 48 hours, she said quietly. Something just came up. Back at the bank, Logan was on a roll. He shared the lobby incident during lunch with 2 other execs. Old guy didn't even flinch. Like he's used to being treated like that, he said between bites of salmon tartare. They laughed. One clapped him on the back. Another raised a glass. To protecting our standards, they toasted. What they didn't know was that the old man, he wasn't just used to it. He expected it. And this time, he was ready. James Carter had built his first company from nothing, brick by brick. He'd been denied loans in the 80s, overlooked in the 90s, ignored in the early 2000s, until one day the world couldn't ignore him anymore. When Ava was a teenager, he'd told her, "People won't always see your worth. So you build something so massive, so undeniable, they're forced to look up." Now here he was in his 60s, modest suit, calm voice, still being underestimated. And he wasn't even angry. He was strategic. That night, as Logan scrolled through LinkedIn, grinning over likes on a post about maintaining elite client standards, James sat at Ava's kitchen table, coffee and hand suit jacket draped over the chair. "He threw your ID?" Ava asked again, her voice tight. James nodded. Ava didn't shout. She didn't rant. She opened her laptop, pulled up the contract file, and said, "Clause 17. Discrimination or unethical behavior nullifies agreement with no financial penalty." She looked up. "Dad, want to help me rewrite history?" James smiled again, but this time it wasn't a warning, it was a promise. And somewhere across Denver, a $5 billion empire had just been placed on a 48-hour countdown. 2 days later, Granite Capital's top-floor conference room was prepped like it was hosting royalty. Polished glass walls, bottled water from Iceland, not a fingerprint in sight. Logan Daniels stood near the window, beaming. "Today's the day," he whispered, fixing the dimple in his gold tie. This deal was his launch pad. Once signed, he'd move to Manhattan. Senior VP, stock options, legacy stuff. At 9:56 a.m., his assistant Rachel stepped into the room, pale. "Logan," she said quietly, "the Carter Tech team just arrived." "Perfect," he grinned. "Escorts them in 5-star treatment." She hesitated. "They're already here, and they brought someone." Before Logan could ask, the glass doors slid open. In walked Ava Carter, confident and poised, flanked by 2 legal officers and her CFO. But at the center, wearing a sharply pressed charcoal suit and the calmest face in the room, was James Carter. Logan blinked. "Wait, that's..." Ava nodded. "Yes, that's my father, our senior strategic advisor." Silence thickened the room. James pulled out a leather folder and laid it gently on the table. "Mr. Daniels." Ava began, voice neutral. "Before we proceed, I'd like to clarify something. Did you or did you not throw this man's ID onto the floor in your lobby 2 days ago?" Logan's face flushed. I didn't know who he was. I thought..." Ava cut him off. "That's the point. You didn't need to know who he was. You just had to treat him like a human being." She opened the folder. Inside were printouts of Logan's public social media posts, statements about preserving brand integrity, keeping a certain client profile, and dozens of liked comments subtly mocking DEI efforts. One post read, "Exclusivity isn't racism. It's just knowing who belongs." She slid it forward. "Care to explain this mindset?" Logan glanced at the bank's legal counsel. No one moved. Across the table, James finally spoke. "Mr. Daniels," he said slowly, "do you know how many years it takes to build trust with a financial institution, to convince working-class families, veterans, small business owners that their money matters?" Logan looked down. "I've built companies," James continued, "cleaned toilets to pay rent, risked everything to create jobs. And in less than 10 seconds, you told me I wasn't worth eye contact." Then Ava leaned in. "We're not here to negotiate," she said flatly. "We're here to notify." "Notify," Logan echoed. "That we're terminating the agreement," she said. "Effective immediately. Clause 17, ethical misconduct." Michael Reynolds, the regional director of the bank, burst into the room breathless. "Miss Carter, let's discuss this. Surely we can fix this." James stood up slowly. "There's nothing broken that can be fixed here," he said, "because what's broken is embedded." Ava looked Michael in the eye. "This deal wasn't just about numbers. It was about values. Your bank showed us yours." Then she paused just long enough for every executive in the room to feel the weight of what came next. $5 billion pulled because your VP thought power meant permission. Logan slumped into the leather chair behind him. "But my future, my position," he murmured. James looked at him calm as ever. "You judged me by what I wore. I judged you by what you revealed." The Carter Tech team left the room with quiet precision. Inside, silence lingered. Outside, news already started to break. Granite Capital loses $5 billion deal over executive misconduct. LinkedIn flooded with whispers. Logan's name trended, but for all the wrong reasons. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't just the end of a deal, it was the end of his career. Logan Daniels didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his luxury mattress, still in his now wrinkled suit, staring blankly at the half-drunk glass of bourbon in his hand. The silence in his penthouse had never felt so loud. His phone buzzed. Another news alert. "Carter Tech pulls $5 billion deal from Granite Capital over executive misconduct." Underneath the headline were hundreds of comments, some angry, some cheering, but the worst ones were the quiet ones. Never judge a book by its suit. Logan Daniels, a $5 billion mistake in a $500 tie. Power with no respect is just a loaded gun in the wrong hands. Across the city at the Carter residence, the lights were still on. James Carter sat in his home office reading through dozens of messages from strangers. One from a young black entrepreneur read, "I walked into a bank last year in Texas. They laughed at my loan request. Watching you stand your ground gave me courage I didn't know I had. Thank you." Another from a war veteran. "Sir, I served too, and I know what it feels like to be invisible in a room full of suits. You made us visible again." James leaned back, exhaled slowly. He wasn't one for praise, but something about these messages hit different. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about impact. 2 days later, Logan was called into an emergency HR meeting. They didn't even offer him coffee. "Effective immediately, you're being terminated for conduct unbecoming of a senior executive," the HR director said without emotion. Logan tried to protest. "I've given 8 years to this place." The room stayed still. 8 years of filtering clients?" she asked coldly. 8 years of hidden bias behind polished smiles. Logan stood quietly, packed his things into a cardboard box, and walked through the same lobby where he'd humiliated James Carter. This time, no one looked up. Meanwhile, Carter Tech was booming. The story had gone viral, but what mattered more was the message. Ava received calls from 3 competing banks offering even better terms than Granite ever did. She chose Liberty First Bank, a newer institution led by veterans, women, and minorities, a place where integrity wasn't a slogan, but policy. The new deal, $5.2 billion over 7 years. The press called it the respect dividend. Ava didn't care much about headlines. She cared about legacy. That weekend, James was invited to speak at a local business summit. He didn't prepare slides. He didn't wear anything flashy. He just stood there calm as ever and began. "I've been mistaken for a janitor. I've been told to use the side entrance, and last week, I was told I didn't belong in a bank." He paused. The room hung on his every word. But the real story isn't about me. It's about what we allow. It's about what we walk past, what we laugh at, what we ignore. Because silence is permission. Then he said the line that would be quoted for months. "The true cost of disrespect isn't dollars, it's trust. And once that's gone, the math doesn't matter." The room erupted in applause, but James just nodded, thanked them, and walked off quietly. No celebration, just dignity. Back in the shadows of social media, Logan tried to rebuild. He posted apologies. He deleted old comments. He tried to look humble. But the internet never forgets. And in every job interview he attended, the same thing happened. "Ah, you're that Logan Daniels. We're going in another direction." One manager didn't even let him finish. Just slid the news article across the desk and said, "We don't need a $5 billion liability." In a small cafe 6 months later, James and Ava shared coffee. Across the room, they saw a familiar face hunched over hair thinner suit cheaper. It was Logan. He caught their eyes. Started to stand, then froze. James nodded once. Ava said nothing. As Logan sat back down, ashamed, James turned to his daughter. "Forgiveness is free, Ava, but trust that has interest rates higher than any bank he's ever worked for." 1 year later, the National Business Ethics Convention, Las Vegas. The ballroom was packed. Over 3,000 executives, investors, and startup founders from across the country. Media outlets lined the walls. Cameras rolled. Hashtags trended. The keynote. The Cost of Arrogance in Modern Business, Speaker James Carter. He took the stage, slowly dressed in his signature charcoal gray suit. No flash, no entourage, just presence. The applause was respectful, but no one expected what was coming. He adjusted the mic, scanned the room, and began. "They say it takes a second to destroy trust and a lifetime to rebuild it. But sometimes you don't get that lifetime. Sometimes the second is all you're remembered for." The room fell silent. "Let me tell you about a man. A man who thought a plastic ID told him everything he needed to know about someone. That the suit you wore, the watch on your wrist, or the accent in your voice was a measure of value." He paused. That man made a decision in 5 seconds. He threw a stranger's ID onto a cold marble floor, and in doing so, he threw away $5 billion. Gasps echoed in the audience. Even those who knew the story felt it hit harder hearing it from the source. Then James dropped the moment no one saw coming. "That man is here tonight." The audience collectively inhaled. Cameras turned, eyes searched. And at the back corner of the ballroom sat Logan Daniels, thinner, paler, suit slightly wrinkled, eyes hollow. He froze. James looked directly at him. "Logan, I could have crushed you. I had every tool, every legal, social, and financial means to make sure you'd never work in this town again. And for a while, I did. But that's not the legacy I want." He took a deep breath. "You see, the point of this story isn't revenge, it's reflection. You thought I was nobody. I turned out to be somebody. But what if I really was nobody? Would that have made your actions any less wrong?" A long pause. "We don't owe people respect because of who they are. We owe them respect because of who we are." The room erupted, not in noise, in stillness. Every eye glistened. Every executive leaned forward like children hearing a bedtime story that mattered. James continued, voice steady, eyes sharp. "Business doesn't fail because of bad math. It fails because of bad mindset. And no number on a contract will ever replace the value of simple human dignity." He scanned the room once more. "So tonight, I'm not here to destroy Logan Daniels. I'm here to warn every future Logan Daniels sitting in this room. Because one day someone will walk into your boardroom, not dressed the way you expect, not talking the way you prefer, but carrying the kind of strength that doesn't ask for your approval." Another pause. "And if you're not ready to recognize that strength, you won't just lose a deal. You'll lose your name, your legacy, your entire place at the table." He stepped away from the mic. Silence. Then thunderous applause. Standing ovation. Tears. Shock. Awe. 1,000 people reevaluating every arrogant moment they'd ever brushed off. Backstage reporters scrambled. James Carter trended #1 on Twitter. Business schools clipped the speech within the hour. Harvard Business Review called it the most important speech in corporate America this decade. And Logan, he sat there unmoving. No one looked at him with pity, only with recognition. That man is the warning now. He slowly stood, walked out through the side door, swallowed by silence. Outside, under the neon glow of Vegas, he looked up alone in a crowd of redemption he wasn't invited to join. Because forgiveness might be possible. But trust, that's earned in inches and lost in a single throw. 3 months later, a quiet office in downtown Austin. James Carter now held a new title founder, the Carter Initiative, a mentorship and funding program for underrepresented entrepreneurs. Every Thursday, the room was filled with young dreamers, ex-military immigrants, first-gen students, ex-felons, turned coders, all with big ideas and even bigger obstacles. And James, he didn't teach business plans. He taught dignity strategy. When they underestimate you, he said, "Don't get angry, get focused. Make their doubt your fuel. Don't fight for a seat at the table. Build your own table." His voice had no bitterness, just experience. Meanwhile, at a strip mall insurance agency in Reno, Nevada, Logan Daniels sat behind a desk with a flickering lamp. No views, no clients, no headlines. He now sold life insurance door to door. Every morning he practiced new versions of his apology, hoping one might eventually sound right. But deep down he knew it wasn't what he said that ruined him. It was what he revealed. One Friday afternoon, his old colleague Rachel, now an executive at Liberty First, passed him on the street. They locked eyes for a second. She offered a polite nod, then kept walking. Logan didn't call out, didn't chase, because some distances aren't meant to be closed. Back at the Carter Initiative, Ava dropped by. "Dad," she said, "you've mentored 37 founders in 10 weeks. He smiled. "Feels like 38 miracles." They shared coffee on the rooftop, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. Ava turned to him, serious. "Do you ever regret not taking it further with Logan? The lawsuit, the public statement, you could have buried him." James shook his head. "Ava, I didn't want to destroy a man. I wanted to destroy a mindset. And that, we did. His career ended. But more importantly, thousands of people in power started asking better questions. That's impact." She nodded, thoughtful. Then she said something that stopped him cold. I used to think power came from the top, but I realize now it starts when one person refuses to stay at the bottom. He looked at her with pride so deep it didn't need words, just a quiet nod, like a torch had been passed, not with noise, but with purpose. The next week, James gave a talk at a local university, not in a suit, not behind a podium. Just him, a folding chair, and a circle of 20 students. A young woman raised her hand, nervous. "Mr. Carter, how do you keep going when the world keeps slamming doors in your face?" James leaned forward, eyes kind. "You keep walking. You don't knock louder. You build the kind of life that makes the door irrelevant. And when you finally get in, you hold that door open for the next person." The room went quiet, but hearts shifted. That night, James returned home and pulled a small box from his drawer. Inside was the original ID card, the one Logan had thrown. He stared at it, not with anger, but with a kind of reverence. Because that card, once seen as trash, had triggered a transformation that no dollar amount could measure. He smiled and whispered, "Sometimes the most valuable thing is the thing the world tries to throw away." 6 months later, James Carter sat in the front row of a graduation ceremony. But it wasn't college. It was the first graduating class of the Carter Initiative's Entrepreneur Bootcamp 28 founders who once believed they had no shot. Now they stood proudly ready to pitch to investors, build their brands, and lead their teams, all from a place of resilience, not revenge. Each wore a small pin on their chest, a tiny silver rectangle. An ID card, not with names, not with titles. Just one word engraved in bold letters. Worthy. As the ceremony ended, the youngest founder, a 19-year-old coder named Malik, approached James. "Sir, do you ever wonder what would have happened if that banker never threw your ID?" James smiled. Then none of this would have happened. He looked around at the cheering crowd, the families, the tears, the joy. Sometimes the disrespect isn't a dead end. It's a detour to a better destination. Somewhere far away in a quiet living room, Logan Daniels watched the graduation on a live stream. He sat alone. The same ID story had now been turned into a Harvard Business School case study. It was taught in corporate DEI seminars. It was even adapted into a stage play in New York. And he had become a living lesson, not in what to become, but in what not to become. He turned off the screen, set the remote down, and stared at his own reflection for a long time. For the first time in years, he didn't see a victim. He saw a warning. And maybe, just maybe, that was his role now. Back in Austin, as the sun set behind the skyline, Ava and James stood in the doorway of their new office, the headquarters of Carter & Carter Impact Fund. Ava held a framed quote, handed it to her father. "Power is not who you control, it's who you choose to uplift." James nodded. "Put it above the main entrance." She smiled. "For everyone to see." "No," he said, "for everyone to remember." They stepped inside not just as a father and daughter, but as proof that dignity, when protected, becomes destiny. If this story hit you in the heart, don't just scroll away. Share it with someone who needs to hear that respect is non-negotiable, and success doesn't come from stepping over others, but from lifting them up. Subscribe for more real stories that change how we think live and lead.